get your boys out of South Robert Street, out of your house. And when the FBI arrived, the food was still hot on their plates. And over again, the St. Paul police thwarted the efforts of the FBI to capture the gangsters. They were totally on the take.
That's really interesting. Tell me about speakeasies. That's not really the criminal aspect, but a friend of ours actually drove their car into the garage and it caved in because there was a speakeasy underneath.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah. There are caves along the Mississippi River bluffs. So as you're on our side of the Mississippi River here in Lower Town, and you look across toward West St. Paul, that's all soft limestone. And originally, the limestone caves, which were naturally created, were used by the Kraft Cheese Company because it was natural refrigeration. You could keep cheese in there. It was also used for mushrooms because they were mushroom caves. But then come Prohibition. It's much more cost effective to store illegal liquor in a cheese cave or a mushroom cave. So all that mushrooms and cheese were removed. The gangsters put all the illegal liquor in, and then they turned a lot of those caves into gorgeous speakeasies. Chandeliers, they would have butlers with little brooms so that when the limestone would fall on you and your girl, they would come by and they would get the limestone off your shoulders before they brought you your steak. It was a wild time in St. Paul. Some of the greatest jazz performers in America came to St. Paul because this is where the gambling was, the high rolling was, because of the gangsters. And the gangsters ruled St. Paul for a long time. John J. O'Connor, the police chief, started the deal between the crooks and the cops at the turn of the century, roughly 1902. The police finally were kicked out, the crooked cops, in 1934. So basically, the crooks owned St. Paul for 3 decades.
That's pretty amazing. Who was this guy, Leon Gleckman? I heard he ran the town from like 1928 to 32.
Leon Gleckman was to St. Paul what Al Capone was to Chicago, what Kid Can was to Minneapolis. He was as close to a godfather, although he wasn't Italian like me, he was Jewish American. Leon was a bootlegger, but he was also a fixer. If you wanted to, be mayor of St. Paul, you had to clear it with Leon. And I found wiretaps because Leon's office was the Hotel St. Paul, which still stands today, 3rd floor. So the FBI rented the suite next to Leon's, bugged his phones. He was calling U.S. senators, mayors, governors, heads of corporations. Leon was a very powerful man. Eventually, he was convicted of felonies. It was clear he was going to go to prison. And one day, he was 3 blocks from this studio, got into his car with very little liquor on his breath, drove his car full tilt in downtown St. Paul into a bridge abutment. Everybody at the time said Leon decided he was not going to go to prison. Most likely, he took his life rather than go to the pen.
Now, there were 2 kidnappings in that family. He was kidnapped, and one of his daughters were kidnapped. Isn't that right?
I've heard about Leon Gleckman's kidnapping, and of course, it was dangerous being a bootlegger. In those days, bootleggers were often kidnapped by rival bootleggers. Everybody who kidnapped Leon Gleckman, shall we say, had a very early demise. He punished the gentleman who decided to abduct him. The 2 most famous kidnappings in St. Paul were the kidnapping in June of 1933 of William Ham of the Ham Brewery, and then half a year later, in January of 1934, a little more than half a year, was Ed Bremer of the Bremer Foundation and the Landmark Brewery and everything else. The total take for the 2 millionaires who were kidnapped in St. Paul, William Ham and Ed Bremer, was about $300,000, which in today's money would be quite a few millions of dollars. It was the Barker Karpus gang working in cahoots with the St. Paul police. Not only did the Barker Karpus gang work in cahoots with the police to kidnap these 2 millionaires, they specifically worked in partnership with the kidnap squad of the St. Paul police. The very cops that were assigned to prevent kidnapping, I swear to God, according to the FBI files, it was the kidnap squad which identified which rich men in St. Paul were most likely to be kidnapped, and then called the crooks and said, he's worth He's worth 200,000. Take Ed Bremer. Both of the Ed Bremer and William Hamm were returned unharmed, relatively unharmed. All the money that was paid, the $300,000, not a penny, was ever recovered. And there's rumors that in Zumbrota, Minnesota, which is where I think it was Bremer was driven through on the way to being released, there is a wooden fence post under which is a tin can, inside of which is $200,000 worth of ransom money. Between you and I think if we found it, first off, it would be soup. It's been about 70 years. But the other is, I don't think you could spend it. I think federal ransom money would probably be confiscated from you. But I hear that in Zumbrota, there are guys with metal detectors who go up to every wooden fence, hoping they'll find the $200,000 from the 1930s kidnapping of William Hamm and Ed Bremer.
That's very interesting. In case you're just joining us, I'm talking to Paul Maccabee, author of John Dillinger Slept Here, and we're discussing St. Paul in the 1930s, the gangster era. Tell me about some of the more colorful characters.
People always ask me, who are your favorite gangsters? Which is a freaky question because many of them were psychopaths, they were killers, but still, here's my favorites. A lesser known one was Edna Murray, who was known as the Kissing Bandit. She lived in the Crocus area of St. Paul, right nearby Lexington and Goodrich, kind of in the Grand area. A very beautiful area. All the gangsters lived in the nicest neighborhoods of St. Paul. Edna, the Kissing Bandit Murray, would find out that a truck was being driven through rural Minnesota filled with furs and jewelry. She and her men would walk into the highway, the truck would stop, she would climb into the cab of the truck, lock lips with the truck driver, and apparently the power of her smooch was so intense that the truck driver would be paralyzed in his seat, her gang would liberate the contents of the truck, she was sent to prison. She was also known as Rabbits Murray because she was able to escape from prison 3 times by jumping over the fence. So I love Edna Murray, the Kissing Bandit. You gotta love her. But the big 3 were John Dillinger, baseball-loving Indiana farm boy turned bank robber, Alvin Creepy Karpus, who lived in White Bear Lake and Dellwood, just outside of St. Paul, for quite a while, and obviously Ma Barker, who's just fascinating. Pick one.
Dillinger.
John Dillinger, public enemy number 1. The amazing thing about Dillinger is provably he probably only killed one man, a sheriff, Jess Sarber. And if you saw Johnny Depp portraying John Dillinger in the movie Public Enemies, that I think evoked the period very well, but it really transformed the love story between Johnny Dillinger and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Menominee Indian woman, Billie Frechette, into something very grand. It really wasn't. John Dillinger slept with whatever woman crossed his path. So I don't think the movie was accurate in that way. But he truly had a, shall we say, a gallant way about him. My favorite story about Dillinger is after the Little Bohemia escape in Wisconsin, Rhinelander, Wisconsin. FBI agents are lying dead. There's a man in the back of Dillinger's car and he's racing toward safety in St. Paul. So there's blood everywhere. Dillinger decides he's got to switch his automobile in St. Paul because the one he has is filled with blood. So he kidnaps a young couple with a 2-year-old baby, apologizes to them. I'm so sorry, we have to take your car. We have to take you with us. We'll let you go. Dillinger stops the car just outside of St. Paul. He goes into a grocery store, comes out with an ice cream cone, gives it to the 2-year-old girl, and I swear, John Dillinger, public enemy number 1, turns to the mother, who he's kidnapped, and says, "Here you go. It's for your baby. We love kids. We're not all bad." You know, John Dillinger, child care worker. You know, meanwhile, there's a guy dying in the back seat. But so Dillinger had whatever Johnny Depp gave him, that kind of odd Errol Flynn swashbucklingness. But then there were crazies like Babyface Nelson, who, when he saw an FBI agent in front of him, saw that the FBI agent had a bulletproof vest, and Nelson goes, "I'll give it to you high, I'll give it to you low," and shoots him along the neck and shoots him below the vest through his legs. Babyface Nelson, who lived in St. Paul for years, was nuts. And most of the gangsters were dangerous men.